This woman saves a drowning stranger, but he was a mob boss. So when he wakes up, something incredible happens. Watch until the end. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The Sunday sun beat down on the New York City asphalt with a cruel intensity, perfectly mirroring Arthur Volkov's state of mind as he walked through the deserted streets of downtown. At 38, he carried on his shoulders the weight of an empire built on questionable foundations, a legacy from a powerful Eastern European lineage that had learned generations ago that survival demanded hard choices. At that moment, however, the decisions seemed impossible. The morning's meeting had ended in veiled threats and gazes heavy with sinister promises. Long-standing rivals were testing the limits of his patience, questioning his authority and, worse, his ability to maintain control over territories that had cost blood to conquer. Arthur adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie, an automatic gesture when he felt pressured, and decided he needed some fresh air before making any decision that could have irreversible consequences. Central Park appeared before him like an urban oasis, offering the possibility of a few moments of peace away from the watchful eyes of armed men and the constant negotiations that shaped every minute of his existence. He had grown accustomed to luxury and power, but also to the corrosive loneliness that accompanied those who always distrusted the intentions of others. Every smile directed at him could hide a financial interest. Every gesture of affection could mask a potential betrayal. Arthur walked toward the lake, his footsteps echoing on the nearly empty pavement as he tried to organize thoughts that seemed increasingly fragmented. The stress of recent months had taken its toll, forcing him to discreetly resort to medication that promised to control his anxiety, but often left his mind in a dangerous fog. He knew he shouldn't have taken 2 pills that morning, but the pressure had been unbearable. Meanwhile, on the other side of the park, Eleanor Hayes was finishing storing the rescue equipment in the small station where she worked on weekends. At 21, she had learned early on that every dollar was earned with sweat and determination, values her humble parents had taught her through their daily example. Her job as a lifeguard helped her pay for her nursing studies, but it also nourished her soul in a way that money could never explain. Eleanor had swapped her red and yellow uniform for a light pink dress that highlighted her natural red hair, a genetic inheritance that always made her stand out wherever she went. She had grown up aware of her unique beauty, but also determined to be known for much more than her appearance. Her inner strength, forged in the hardships of her Queen's upbringing, was what truly defined her. The Central Park lake mirrored the overcast sky of that afternoon when Eleanor noticed a strange movement near the edge. A man in a dark suit was walking with uncertain steps, one hand pressed to his temple, as if fighting an intense pain. She watched with growing concern as he got too close to the water, losing his balance alarmingly. Arthur felt the world spin around him as the combination of stress, heat, and medication finally overcame his resistance. His legs gave way, and he fell heavily into the water, the weight of his wetsuit pulling him down as his consciousness slipped between reality and fragmented nightmares of his violent childhood. Water flooded his lungs as he desperately fought to reach the surface, but his movements became increasingly uncoordinated. Eleanor didn't hesitate for a second. Leaving her shoes and bag on the bank, she dived in fully clothed, her precise movements cutting through the water with the grace of someone who was born to swim. Years of training at her neighborhood's community pool, where she had learned to see water as a refuge and not a threat, guided her arms as she swam toward the drowning man. When she finally reached Arthur, Eleanor applied every rescue technique she knew by heart, fighting against the unconscious weight of the man's body as she brought him to the surface. Her red hair floated in the water like liquid flames, creating a stunning contrast with the pale skin of the man she held. On the bank, she immediately began resuscitation procedures, pressing on Arthur's chest with force and determination, alternating with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The first sign of life came with a violent cough, followed by the expulsion of the water that had flooded Arthur's lungs. Eleanor sighed in relief, but remained attentive as he gradually regained consciousness. When his dark eyes finally opened, they met the worried face of a woman he had never seen before, but who radiated a genuine concern for his well-being. Arthur tried to speak, but his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Eleanor gently helped him sit up, offering reassuring words while she checked his vital signs with the practical knowledge she had gained from her nursing studies. For a man accustomed to waking up alone or surrounded only by people interested in his power and money, that selfless display of care was completely disarming. The ambulance arrived in a few minutes, called by other parkgoers who had witnessed the incident. Throughout the entire ride to the hospital, Eleanor remained by Arthur's side, holding his hand and talking softly to keep him calm. She didn't ask questions about his identity or profession, concerning herself only with ensuring he remained conscious and stable. At the hospital, while doctors performed the necessary exams, Arthur watched Eleanor through the curtain of the emergency room bed. She had stayed there through the early morning, refusing to go home until she was absolutely sure he was out of danger. Her pink dress was still damp in places, her finally dry hair forming a wild frame around her delicate face, but her green eyes remained alert and full of a compassion Arthur hadn't experienced in decades. When he was finally discharged early the next morning, Arthur tried to offer her money as a way of thanks, expecting her to accept it and disappear from his life like everyone else. But Eleanor refused any payment, making it clear that she had saved his life simply because it was the right thing to do. This purity of intention completely destabilized the emotional defenses Arthur had built over decades. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself before someone who wanted absolutely nothing from him other than to know he was safe and sound. The days following the accident at the lake brought a strange restlessness to Arthur's life. Accustomed to strictly controlled routines where every minute was calculated and every decision carefully weighed, he found himself constantly thinking about Eleanor Hayes. Her name had been mentioned by the hospital doctors, but Arthur had stored every syllable in his memory as if it were a rare treasure. For the first time in decades, someone had entered his life without asking permission, without calculating advantages, simply appearing like a saving angel when he needed it most. Eleanor, for her part, had returned to her routine of studies and work, but she couldn't forget the mysterious man she had saved in the park. There was something in his dark eyes that spoke of an impressive emotional depth, an ancient sadness that contrasted with the evident sophistication of his clothes and manners. During anatomy classes, she would find herself wondering if he was recovering properly, if he had followed the medical recommendations, if he had someone taking care of him at home. Eleanor's mother, Catherine, noticed her daughter's distraction during their Tuesday night dinner as she distractedly pushed food around her plate without really eating. With the sharp intuition of someone who had raised a daughter alone through difficult years, Catherine knew how to recognize when something was completely occupying Eleanor's thoughts, but she respected her daughter's silence, trusting that she would share when she felt ready. Arthur, meanwhile, had discreetly instructed one of his trusted men to find out everything about Eleanor Hayes, not out of suspicion, but out of an urgent need to understand who this woman was, who had stirred something so deep within his armored soul. The information came to him like a portrait of purity and determination, daughter of honest workers, an exemplary student, a volunteer lifeguard on weekends, with no questionable involvements or hidden interests. The following Thursday, Arthur appeared at Central Park during Eleanor's shift, using the pretext of needing to thank her properly. He had chosen more casual clothes, dark slacks and a white shirt without a tie, in an attempt to appear less imposing. Even so, his presence drew attention for the way he moved, for the natural confidence of someone accustomed to being in command, for the expensive details he couldn't completely hide. Eleanor recognized him immediately, feeling her heart race in a way that surprised her. He looked much better. The color had returned to his face, and his movements were firm and decisive. When Arthur approached the lifeguard stand, she climbed down from her observation chair with a genuine smile that hit him like a punch to the gut. It had been weeks since anyone had smiled at him that way, with no ulterior motives, without calculating advantages. The initial conversation was cautious, punctuated by pauses where both seemed to be searching for the right words. Arthur thanked her again for the rescue, this time with more eloquence, explaining how the accident had made him reflect on priorities he had neglected. Eleanor, in turn, was curious about what an obviously successful man was doing, walking alone in a park on a Sunday afternoon. But she didn't dare ask directly. When Eleanor mentioned she was studying nursing, Arthur felt an even deeper connection to her. The idea that such a young and beautiful woman had chosen to dedicate her life to caring for others genuinely impressed him. He shared, vaguely, that he worked in the family business, an edited version of the truth that wasn't exactly a lie, but was far from revealing the true nature of his activities. The following encounters happened almost naturally. Arthur found out Eleanor's class schedule and began to appear casually on campus, always with some plausible excuse. He was in the area for business. He wanted to get to know the institution where his savior studied. He needed to consult something in the library. Eleanor, initially surprised by these coincidences, gradually began to look forward to these encounters that brightened her days. During these conversations, Arthur discovered a whole new world. Eleanor spoke of her dreams of working in public hospitals, of making a difference in the lives of people who couldn't afford expensive treatments. Her passion for her profession was genuine and contagious, making Arthur question for the first time if there were motivations beyond power and money to guide a person's life choices. Eleanor, in turn, was fascinated by Arthur's intelligence and culture. He knew art, literature, history, and spoke naturally about subjects she had only studied in books. More than that, he showed a genuine interest in her opinions, asking questions that led her to reflect and expand her own thoughts. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt intellectually stimulated by a man, discovering that physical attraction could be intensified by a mental connection. The age difference, which had initially worried Eleanor, gradually became irrelevant in the face of the emotional maturity Arthur demonstrated. He never treated her like a child or minimized her dreams because of her youth. On the contrary, he showed a respect for her determination that she rarely found in men her own age. Arthur, on the other hand, struggled daily with the guilt of not revealing the truth about his life. Every sincere smile from Eleanor, every trusting look she gave him, was like a stab to his conscience. He knew he was building something based on dangerous omissions, but the idea of losing her because of his honesty was simply unbearable. The first physical touch happened on a rainy afternoon, when Eleanor tripped on the wet college steps and Arthur caught her by the arms, preventing her from falling. For a few seconds, they remained that way, too close, feeling each other's warmth despite the cold rain. Eleanor noticed how his hands were strong and sure, but also surprisingly gentle. Arthur smelled her soft perfume, a mixture of inexpensive shampoo and something natural that was uniquely hers. When they pulled away, both knew that something had irrevocably changed between them. The attraction that had been quietly growing had gained a physical dimension impossible to ignore. Arthur found himself dreaming of Eleanor during sleepless nights, imagining what it would be like to kiss her, to touch her, to wake up beside her. Eleanor, for her part, began to question her own limits and desires, discovering that she could feel things for a man she had never imagined were possible. The first kiss happened a week later, when Arthur walked her to the bus stop after her classes ended. They had been talking about Eleanor's plans for the future, and something in the way she spoke about her dreams, with her eyes shining with hope and determination, made Arthur completely lose control. He kissed her right there on the busy sidewalk, temporarily forgetting all the caution he had learned to maintain. The kiss had changed everything between Arthur and Eleanor, creating an intimacy that both knew was dangerous, but from which they couldn't pull away. In the weeks that followed, they began to meet more frequently, always in discreet places where Arthur believed he could keep Eleanor away from the dark world he commanded. Small coffee shops in Greenwich Village, historic downtown bookstores, walks through the gardens of the Met. Places where he could pretend, at least for a few hours, that he was just an ordinary man in love with an extraordinary woman. Eleanor began to notice inconsistencies in Arthur's stories about his work. He was always available at the strangest hours, received urgent calls that left him visibly tense, and used different cars for each meeting, always expensive and discreet models. When she asked about the details of his business, he skillfully deflected the topic, steering the conversation back to her, showing a genuine interest in her studies and dreams that made her temporarily forget her doubts. The first major clue about the true nature of Arthur's activities came when Eleanor saw him talking to two intimidating-looking men outside her college. She was late for their scheduled meeting and approached without being noticed, managing to overhear fragments of a conversation that mentioned territories, percentages, and consequences for those who didn't respect established agreements. Arthur's body language was completely different from what she knew, stiffer, more authoritarian, charged with a subtle threat that made her blood run cold. When Arthur saw her approaching, his expression changed instantly, returning to the caring man she had learned to love. But Eleanor had already caught enough to understand that there were layers to his personality that remained completely hidden. During dinner that night, she tried to discreetly probe about the men he was talking to, but Arthur was evasive, explaining only that they were partners in some family investments. Meanwhile, Arthur's family began to pressure him to consider an arranged marriage with Isabella Moretti, the daughter of a rival clan that had proposed a strategic alliance through the matrimonial union. Anya, the matriarch of the Volkov family, argued that Eleanor was just a temporary distraction, a phase that every powerful man went through before assuming his real responsibilities. To her, the social difference between Arthur and Eleanor was an insurmountable barrier that he would have to accept sooner or later. Arthur categorically rejected the proposal, causing the first serious argument he had with his family in years. During a tense meeting in the office of the family mansion on the Upper East Side, he made it clear that his personal life was not up for negotiation, regardless of the strategic benefits the arranged marriage might bring. His determination surprised everyone, especially his Uncle Robert, who had always considered Arthur a pragmatic man above all sentimentality. The situation became complicated when Marco Moretti, Isabella's father and leader of one of the city's most influential groups, interpreted the refusal as a personal insult. A man with an explosive temper and an easily wounded pride, he began to spread rumors about Arthur's emotional stability, questioning his ability to lead and suggesting he was being manipulated by a gold-digging girl who had identified an opportunity for social climbing. Eleanor, completely oblivious to these tensions, continued her routine of studies and work, but noticed that Arthur seemed increasingly distant and worried. He cancelled 2 consecutive meetings, claiming urgent commitments, and when they finally saw each other, she noticed deep, dark circles under his eyes and a muscular tension he tried unsuccessfully to hide. When she asked if everything was okay, he assured her it was just normal work pressures, but Eleanor sensed that something much more serious was happening. The breaking point came on a Friday night when Eleanor decided to surprise Arthur, showing up at the expensive restaurant where he had mentioned he would have a business meeting. She just wanted to give him a book they had discussed during one of their conversations about literature, a romantic gesture she imagined would make him smile after days of evident tension. What Eleanor saw through the restaurant window was Arthur sitting at a table with three men who were clearly not conventional businessmen. One of them had visible scars on his face and neck. Another wore ostentatious jewelry that screamed criminality. And the third maintained the posture of a professional bodyguard. The conversation seemed intense, with Arthur gesturing authoritatively, while the others listened with a respectful attention that bordered on fear. When Arthur noticed Eleanor on the sidewalk, his face instantly paled. He stood up from the table abruptly, ignoring his companion's protests, and left the restaurant to intercept her before she could get any closer. The expression in his eyes was a mixture of panic, guilt, and desperation that Eleanor had never seen, confirming her worst suspicions about the real nature of his business. The argument that followed was devastating for both of them. Eleanor demanded the whole truth, and Arthur, cornered between the need to protect her and the fear of losing her, ended up revealing fragments of his reality. The family with a tradition in questionable activities, the territories he controlled, the violence that was sometimes necessary to maintain the balance of power. He tried to explain that he had never hurt innocents, that he followed a code of honor inherited for generations. But for Eleanor, raised on principles of absolute honesty, any involvement with criminality was unforgivable. Eleanor walked away from him that night with a broken heart, feeling betrayed not only by the lies, but by the discovery that she had fallen in love with someone whose life contradicted all the values she held dear. Arthur tried to follow her, but she made it clear that she needed time to process everything she had discovered, asking him to respect her space while she decided if she could live with the truth. In the days following the breakup, Arthur plunged into a state of despair that worried even his closest men. He had lost interest in the business, delegating important decisions and avoiding meetings that required his presence. For the first time in his life, he understood the real meaning of the word loss, discovering that no material achievement could fill the void left by Eleanor's absence. Eleanor, for her part, tried to maintain her normal routine, but was visibly shaken. Her grades in college began to decline, her concentration at her lifeguard job was compromised, and even her parents noticed the drastic change in her behavior. Catherine tried to talk to her daughter, but Eleanor couldn't explain the situation without revealing details that could put her family in danger. During a sleepless night, Eleanor realized that despite all the shocking revelations, she couldn't simply erase the love she felt for Arthur. She had known the man behind the criminal mask, had seen his capacity for tenderness, his genuine vulnerability, his deep pain. The question that tormented her was not whether he was involved in dangerous activities, but whether there was a real possibility of him leaving that life for his love for her. Eleanor's decision to give Arthur a second chance came after a week of intense reflection, during which she realized that true love doesn't just disappear because you discover uncomfortable aspects about the person you love. She called him on a Tuesday morning, asking to meet at the same lake where it had all begun. Arthur arrived before the scheduled time, visibly nervous and hopeful, carrying with him the determination to be completely honest, even if it meant losing her for good. During this crucial conversation, Arthur revealed not only the details of his criminal activities, but also his personal history. how he had been forced to take on family responsibilities as a teenager after his father's violent death, how every choice he made was motivated by the need to protect the people he loved, how he had created a personal code of ethics that prevented him from harming innocents. Eleanor listened to everything in silence, recognizing in his voice a painful sincerity that deeply touched her protective heart. What sealed their reconciliation was when Arthur made a promise that would completely change the course of his life. He would immediately begin the process of distancing himself from the criminal world, gradually transitioning his legitimate businesses into a completely clean operation. It was a decision that would put his life at risk, cost him most of his fortune, and require years of careful negotiations, but he was willing to pay any price for the possibility of building an honest future with Eleanor. The transformation would not be simple or immediate. Arthur had to negotiate his exit with rivals who saw any change as a sign of weakness, with family members who considered his decision a betrayal of ancestral traditions, and with authorities who questioned the sincerity of his intentions. Each step of the process was accompanied by veiled threats, sabotage attempts, and psychological pressures that tested his determination to the limits. Eleanor remained by his side throughout this dangerous journey, offering not only unconditional love, but also the moral strength he needed to persevere when the temptation to return to his old ways became almost irresistible. She accompanied Arthur to meetings with lawyers, helped him organize the necessary documentation to legitimize his businesses, and offered the emotional support he had never had during the most difficult phases of his life. The most dangerous moment came when Marco Moretti, interpreting Arthur's exit from crime as an opportunity to expand his own territory, decided to accelerate the process through violence. On a Saturday morning, as Eleanor was walking alone to college, she was approached by two men who forced her into a car, taking her to an abandoned warehouse on the east side of the city. When Arthur found out about the kidnapping through an anonymous call demanding his complete surrender in exchange for Eleanor's life, he experienced a despair he had never felt even in the most dangerous moments of his criminal career. For the first time, it wasn't just about his own survival or financial interests, but about the life of the only person who had managed to truly touch his armored heart. Rescuing Eleanor required Arthur to use all the resources and connections he had accumulated over decades, mobilizing old allies and making deals that further compromised his position in the city's underworld. The operation took place during the night, in a precise coordination that involved bribing corrupt cops, neutralizing lookouts, and a carefully planned raid of the location where she was being held. When Arthur finally found Eleanor, tied to a chair in the center of the cold, dirty warehouse, she was frightened but physically unharmed. Her captors had been instructed not to hurt her, using her only as a bargaining chip in a negotiation that Moretti had hoped to win through emotional blackmail. The relief Arthur felt upon seeing her alive and safe was so intense that he almost lost control, embracing her with a force that revealed the absolute panic he had experienced during the hours of her absence. During the rescue, Eleanor witnessed for the first time the protective and desperate Arthur, seeing how he was capable of putting her life above any personal interest. She realized that regardless of his criminal past, he possessed a capacity for love and sacrifice that transcended any moral judgment she could make about his previous choices. In that moment, she understood that the man who had saved her was the same one who had decided to give up everything for her. From that traumatic event, Arthur drastically accelerated the process of leaving the criminal world, accepting significant financial losses and definitively breaking with longtime partners. He sold properties, transferred questionable investments, and established a compensation fund for victims of urban violence in an attempt to symbolically repair some of the damage caused by his past activities. The process of legitimizing his life lasted almost 2 years, during which Arthur and Eleanor faced not only external dangers, but also their own fears and insecurities. Eleanor had to learn to completely trust someone whose past would always be a shadow in their relationship, while Arthur had to develop a new identity based on the values Eleanor had taught him. Arthur's personal transformation was as profound as his professional one. He discovered a capacity for compassion that had been suffocated for decades by pragmatic decisions, began to get involved in volunteer work that Eleanor organized in underserved communities, and gradually developed a completely new perspective on the meaning of success and personal fulfillment. Eleanor, for her part, completed her nursing studies with excellence, specializing in trauma and emergency care, areas where she could apply not only her technical knowledge, but also the emotional understanding she had developed by witnessing Arthur's transformation. She got a job at Bellevue Hospital, finally realizing her dream of working in the public health system. The marriage proposal happened exactly 2 years after the day they met. At the same spot where Eleanor had saved Arthur from drowning, he took her to the edge of the lake at sunset, when the water reflected golden and orange hues that created an almost magical atmosphere. Arthur knelt on the grass and offered a simple but elegant ring, explaining that this place represented not only the beginning of their story, but also the rebirth of his soul through the love she had awakened. The wedding ceremony was intimate and meaningful, held in a small historic chapel in downtown New York, bringing together the two very different families who had learned to accept and respect each other. Catherine, Eleanor's mother, cried with emotion seeing her daughter radiant with happiness, while Anya, matriarch of the Volkov family, finally recognized that Eleanor's strength and dignity were exactly what her grandson needed to find true peace and purpose. Arthur and Eleanor built a life based on honesty, legitimate work, and dedication to social causes that benefited underserved communities in New York. He established a corporate security consulting firm, using his past experience to help companies protect themselves from criminal threats, while she worked tirelessly to improve medical care in public hospitals in the outer boroughs. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.